Welcome aboard.
Please welcome to the stage Axios healthcare reporter Maya Goldman.
Wow, hi. Thank you all so much for being here. It's great to see so many people out tonight. My name is Maya Goldman. I'm a healthcare reporter here at Axios and co-author of our Axios Vitals newsletter, which you should subscribe to if you're not already. If you're following along on social media, you can use the hashtag Axios events to post about tonight. This evening, we have a really exciting discussion, lineup of discussions about the opportunities and challenges that come with this really interesting moment that we're in, where we have this wave of innovation and understanding around women's health. We're really excited, and without further ado, the first guest joining me on stage tonight is co-founder and CEO for the Modern Maternity Clinic, ULA, Adrienne Nickerson. Thanks so much for being here tonight.
Thanks for having me.
So one of the first things that struck me about ULA when I was learning about your company was that you really emphasize that your providers listen to patients and make decisions with them, not for them. And so I would love for you to talk a little bit about why that's so important and different, and also how does that look in practice?
I mean, I think it's so important because we honestly have sort of a paternalistic healthcare system. So many things, frankly, about women's health. We are telling women what they should do with their bodies, and pregnancy care is no different. Where I think I look sometimes at the big proliferation we've seen of doulas recently in the past couple of years, and to me, it's always striking that you have to have someone in the room with you as your advocate, or else you're concerned something's going to happen to you that shouldn't happen to you. And so you see C-section rates that are 3 times what they are supposed to be. You see lots of really poor outcomes, and I think it all comes back to, at the core, we need to listen to women, we need to trust them. And so it is so core to what it is that we do at ULA. And part of our ability to do that is we just have longer appointment times. Sometimes it's not rocket science. You just need to spend time with patients to be able to have the real conversations and the dialogue that's necessary to deliver really great care.
Yeah. And something else that seems unique to ULA is more frequent touch points for patients instead of you have one scan at the beginning and whatever. Why is that important, and how do you make that work financially with the reimbursement that you get from insurance providers?
I think, pregnancy care doesn't happen in, the 14 visits over 9 months. It happens so frequently and all the moments in between. And so to deliver really great care, you have to support women and birthing people in those moments. And so it was so core to what we were building at ULA to be able to ensure that when the patient had a question, at 2 in the morning or 2 in the afternoon, that they felt like they could get connected to really great care. But to your point, you have to sort of be creative with the payment paradigms that exist in the US, which is we have a fee-for-service driven healthcare system, which means you sort of get paid to not always do the right things. And so for us, we were like, well, how do we get creative? If we know, for example, that something that's really powerful for women during care is actually community, right? As much as you want your provider to be an expert, you learn from other women. It's actually one of the things that have been demonstrated to drive down preterm birth outcomes. And so we offer group visits as part of what we do at ULA. It's I think it works because you have a provider spending more time with patients, but they're doing it in a group setting. And so it works within a very challenging fee-for-service landscape to be able to do something that is also really great to the patient.
Yeah.
So it's being clever in a lot of those ways. It's also why we invest in technology, and we use that as a way to say, what are things that we can do in our app, in our education, that is available for all women, and because you sort of build it once, it is much more scalable than always having to have sort of a one-to-one human interaction. It lets the time our providers spend with patients be really like value add on the thing that they need to talk about in that moment.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And an undercurrent to all of these conversations is the inequities that we have in maternal health. It's very well documented that Black women are significantly more likely to have adverse experiences in childbirth and to die. How are you approaching that at ULA? How are you approaching health equity?
I think in a lot of different ways. I think one of the stats I like to say, because I think it really hits on why it's such a pervasive challenge, is that a Black woman who has a college degree has a higher likelihood of poor outcomes than a white woman who hasn't even gotten sort of high school diploma, which means there's just pervasive racism in our healthcare system, and it shows up in care, which means you can't really do one little thing and think that it's going to make a difference. And so we sort of attack that on a lot of different ways. One is we think about hiring, and we have hired a really diverse clinical care team. We know racially coded care results in better outcomes. But we also know the midwifery workforce, which is a huge part of how ULA delivers its care, is 90% white. And so it's not enough just to hire a diverse team. You also need to make sure that the providers who are on the care team who aren't Black have racial, implicit bias training. And we do it not just for our care providers, we do it for anyone who touches patient all the way up to the executive level, because decisions we make throughout the organization are going to show up and how patients see care. So a piece of it is really how do we build the workforce, and how do we make sure that they're examining their own biases and how it's showing up in decisions that they're making. I think the second piece is actually in the care that we deliver and the services that we design. And so we, for a while, actually did a postpartum support group that was just for our Black patients, and so they were able to do it in community. And I'll sort of pin that for a second, because I think it kind of goes to the third thing that we do, which is we measure all of our data. We disaggregate it by race, and we say, where are we doing well and where are we not? And we're looking at our C-section rates, and we're looking at our preterm birth rates, and we're looking at experience. And we're looking at our women showing up to that postpartum support group that we created. And when they weren't, we took a step back and we talked to our Black patients and we talked to our Black providers, and we used that feedback to redesign and realize it was actually too late. No one wanted to join it by postpartum. We actually needed to do it in the third trimester when they were preparing and starting to think about what their postpartum was going to look like. So I think it's that sort of constant iteration cycle of saying, we're not always going to get it quite right the first time around, but we need to show that we care and this matters, and we're going to continue to look at how we're doing and make sure that we're continuing to move the ball forward.
Yeah, and so right now it seems like ULA patients still tend to give birth in hospitals in a traditional setting. But ULA is very different. And what's that tension between this new model of maternity care and this old vanguard? What does that look like? How do you navigate that?
I think in some ways the consumer's sort of looking for that, though. They kind of want the best of both. They want a collaborative care team of their midwife and their OB and the support, and they want to feel like they're delivering at a really great hospital, that if something goes wrong, they have all of the things that sort of traditional system has in place. So I think most people are looking for that. And I also think, though, when we're looking at who do we partner with, we're looking for a health system that cares about supporting patients and meeting community need and knowing that women want this. And so we work in close partnership for what does the care actually look like on labor and delivery? Not just what are we doing in our clinics or what are we doing postpartum, but how do we make sure the collaborative care experience that we believe so deeply drives better outcomes that the research shows actually plays through in sort of that traditional labor and delivery floor.
Yeah. And so how do you scale this model? How do you bring this to more people across the country?
We scale through partnership with health systems. We think it's so critical to bring sort of the legacy healthcare along. We wouldn't be able to, I think, have as big of an impact if we were trying to do it all on our own. It really is about saying, what do we do that is excellent? And what does a health system do that is excellent? And how do we really bring that together? Which is, I would say, traditionally, a health system is going to be great at really high acuity care. When something really goes wrong, you want a hospital there. But also what is so interesting about sort of pregnancy care is it's the one thing that you're gonna go to probably where it's not a state of disease, right? It's actually the state of wellness, which is why I think it's often so hard for our healthcare system to do it well, and why you need a different approach and something like ULA. And so it really is about sort of, once again, bringing those two things together and using that as the way that we have really massive impact.
Yeah. What's the next women's health area that needs disrupting?
I mean, everything. Like, what doesn't? I feel like I'm so laser focused on pregnancy care that's like hard to pick my head up. And part of the reason why I think I'm so focused on it is because beyond the fact that any way you cut the data, it looks pretty terrible, whether it's maternal mortality or morbidity or equity, you sort of name it, it's broken. But it's also one of the most pervasive shared experiences women have, right? 86% of women become mothers. It's often the first time they're really interacting with the healthcare system, because hopefully, you're in your 20s, 30s, like you're pretty healthy, and then all of a sudden you're going to the doctor or the midwife, 14 times over 9 months. You're getting admitted at the hospital, which means it's actually this moment in time to build trust with women and really change and shape the way that they access healthcare for the rest of their lives. And so I think it's just so important to get it right so that everything else, honestly, in their healthcare and that of their families, right? Women are making 80% of the healthcare decisions. So you really, if you do maternity really well, I actually think it pays dividends across healthcare outcomes and the whole sort of ecosystem.
Yeah. We like to end sometimes with one fun thing here at Axios, and I know that you and your co-founder and one of your other executive team members were all pregnant at the same time while you were starting ULA.
Don't recommend.
What is the biggest similarity and difference between birthing a baby and a company?
Yeah. Maybe at first blush it doesn't sound like a lot, but honestly, quite a lot. I have a 7-month-old right now, and he was just starting to learn to crawl. And what's striking is, when he first birthed into this world, I had to do everything for him, right? Change every diaper. He did not exist without me. And sort of true of the startup, right? It was myself, my co-founder, and a deck. And you're making every decision, you're hiring every person, but success in both of them is actually getting to a point where you're not doing anything, right? You're raising a child, they need to exist without you. And sort of, I'd say that that's the same barometer for success for a company. It's getting it to a point where it no longer needs me.
Yeah, that self-sufficiency. Mm-hmm. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time, but thank you so much for joining us. It's great to get to talk to you. Please stick around for our next conversation, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you so much.
Please welcome to the stage Axios senior policy reporter, Caitlin Owens.
Hello, everyone. It's so fun to see you in this really pink room. I hope some of you are enjoying the sparkly pink cocktails. I'm Caitlin Owens, as they just said, a senior policy reporter at Axios. We're really excited for our next guest. You might know of her. Joining me on stage is activist, influencer, and angel investor, Hannah Bronfman. Hi.
Look at this beautiful room.
It's a nice surprise when you walk out, right? All the pink. Hannah, you wear a lot of hats. You're an activist, you are an advocate, you're an angel investor, and you're also very active on social media. But the underlying theme for all of these roles is a focus on women's health. So my first question to you is, how do you choose which issues and topics to bring up on all of these different platforms?
That's a great question. I mean, it's interesting because sometimes it feels like everything is urgent, but some things are more urgent than others. And then there are narratives that just continuously need to be talked about throughout the year. And right now, particularly, I've been talking a lot about reproductive health and our rights and our freedoms. The mortality rates that are happening with the Black maternal health crisis. But I think really overall, women's health is just something that seems to be what everyone wants to talk about without really putting a lot of action into place or education or resources or money. So it's something that I'm really passionate about. As someone who has like grown up in New York City in a very privileged environment, and having access to holistic modalities at a young age. My mom was like, had me in the room when she was doing acupuncture at 7 years old. That's certainly not the way it looks for the rest of the country, and it's just getting worse without sounding super pessimistic.
And something you just said, yeah, women's health is part of the conversation now. People are really excited about it. But how do you feel like that squares with what you view as the most important issues? In other words, do you think the buzziest topics are also the most important right now?
Actually, I think that it's crazy, but reproductive health is, I think it's not even in the top 3 of what people are caring about in terms of the election, which is really hard to swallow. Because it just feels like the secret here is that America hates women. And that obviously, I think we need to show out in huge amounts of votes and communities to really show everyone what the power of women can do. So yeah, I don't think it's necessarily the buzziest thing is what people or like see it. I think your question was the buzziest thing is not at the top of the ticket.
Yeah. I want to jump to another hat that you wear, which is mother. Can you share how your own journey with fertility and pregnancy and childbirth has really shaped your work?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I will say that I gave birth with Ula. You just heard from her, the CEO of Ula.
Small world.
They were absolutely amazing. Sorry, the question was, how does that shape?
Your whole experience. You've been open about you've used IVF.
Yes.
How has that shaped your work journey?
Sure. So when I first kind of went down the road of wanting to become a mom, I realized very quickly, about 6-7 months into my journey of trying to become pregnant, that something was off. So I ended up going through IVF, and that was like almost about a 2.5 year journey of coming to the conclusion of going through IVF. And just when you go through life experiences, and when you also choose to live your life on the internet, you end up opening up about things that maybe you never thought you'd talk about. That was a really lonely experience, and it felt like at the time people weren't really talking about it.
Right.
And also, there was pregnancy loss, there was, hormones, shots, the waiting room, just like aspects of the journey that I felt like I didn't need to own alone. And it's weird because a lot of my friends weren't necessarily going through that in their lives. So it almost felt more comforting to tell strangers and like a community on the internet than it did to even talk to my friends who didn't necessarily get it. And when understanding that world of fertility, infertility, and giving birth, the care system, the Black maternal health crisis we're dealing with, like all of these things became very much things that I cared about. And so not only did I start advocating for those areas online, but then I also have invested a lot into the maternal health care space. I think I've done about 7 or 8 investments within the maternal health space.
So I'm guessing as you went through this process yourself, you probably learned a lot. I'm sure you learned a lot, right?
So much.
That maybe your average person doesn't know about. So what do you think are some of the biggest things you want society writ large to learn, to know about this fertility process in IVF that that maybe the average person probably doesn't know?
That's a good question. I mean, well, fertility treatments themselves are obviously very expensive, and so any way to help democratize access to IVF is really important. I invested in a company called Kindbody. There are lots of companies like Maven that are doing things to create better benefits for those who still work in corporate environments, which
we are going to talk about.
What?
We're going to get to that.
Okay,
yes,
okay,
yes.
So I won't go too far there. And then, I will say, like 50% of pregnancies are unplanned. So imagine, so 50% are unplanned, the other half, I feel like take a lot of hard work. And I think that what I would tell people is, don't be afraid to advocate for yourself, because this is an area of medicine that still feels very disconnected to any sort of like layman's terms. And that can be really overwhelming, like the things that your doctor is telling you, or and everyone has such a personal baseline of what they're dealing with. And so it's really important to be able to advocate for yourself, do your own research, and make sure you're comfortable with your care team. I tell a lot of my friends who are looking for recommendations, why don't I introduce you to 3 different people and you go have a conversation with all 3 of them. And they're like, well, why would I need to go to all 3 if like you loved the person you were with? I said, well, I loved the person I was with, but you might not love that person. And I think it's really important that you feel supported in your journey, because it's something that's a real mental journey as well. And so if you don't feel that you have the right care team, sometimes I feel like, that can impact your outcome, because stress is a factor in all of this.
Right. And so we touched a little bit on your work with Vice President Harris's campaign and just your general advocacy for reproductive freedoms. It's hard to remember. I think we can safely say this is the most prominent that reproductive rights have been in the political discussion ever, maybe.
Yeah.
And I also think of the topic of just in general having children has come up a lot on the campaign trail. So how would you rate the quality of this kind of national political conversation we're having about reproductive health and the decision to have children at all?
Oh my goodness. Well, to rate
are we talking about the right stuff? Is the conversation smart? Is it helpful?
No, it's not. It's not. It's all fear. It feels like it's all fear mongering. It feels like we are still dealing with the most antiquated, versions of womanhood. And I think that, people are confused by the idea of reproductive care being basic health care. This is much bigger than abortion. And I think people are, using abortion in this politicized way when, first of all, we don't even, at this point, it feels like we don't even really care about, Black women who give birth, women who give birth who are not supported in their workplace. There's no national paid leave. We are literally, that's so embarrassing for the United States. I don't understand how we got here, honestly. So I think people are definitely talking about the wrong things, and I am surprised. I'm actually not surprised, but I am every day horrified by the things I see online from, all sorts of different backgrounds, ethnicities, socioeconomic groups, who believe those narratives.
So I think we're going to move a little bit more onto the investor side of things, but I do want to talk about benefits. I think that over the past few years, we've seen employers become more conscious of the need to be more thoughtful about women's health. So before we get into what that exactly looks like, how do you think employers should be thinking about this?
I think employers should be giving women whatever they want in order to keep them in the workplace and happy. It doesn't seem like a crazy idea to me, but I just was talking to a friend the other day who just had her 3rd baby. She works at Blackstone, and they want them to come. They want her to come back to work 4 days a week, and I think it's been 3 months. She's like, no, I'm not doing that. So she's leaving her job. Right. And I think that if we don't really put women first, and even with these abortion bans, we are going to see women leave their jobs, leave their state to go to places where they have better care, and that is going to make a huge impact on the economy. And I don't think people understand how the two go hand in hand. It's baffling to me.
And so just forget about benefits for a second, and maybe you're hitting at this a little bit, but there's also culture, right? I think just the way that we handle and approach caregiving responsibilities. What can employers be doing to support women more in that capacity?
Well, they should be giving paternal leave as well, or whatever for your partner. I think that, our care system has a really long, they've failed in so many different ways, and I think that the postpartum care model is non-existent. That's from a maternal standpoint, a mental standpoint, physical standpoint, having, even just like the conversation around formula. Like, why is this conversation still so polarizing in 2024? Women have to go back to work. Most women have to go back to work 2 weeks after giving birth. And you expect that person to breastfeed their child for 6 months? Make it make sense. Like, it's just crazy to me that we put these huge emphasis on how we're supposed to show up, and then also be, the super mom and the boss at work, and when people are just trying to literally make sure that they can, heal properly. Right. I mean, women are still in diapers 2 weeks after giving birth. And if you had a vaginal birth, if you had a C-section, please do not stand up for at least 2 weeks. Like, it's crazy that we don't understand how this works, and that it's reflected not only in the workplace, but also the lack of care. And
Right. And all of this takes a mental burden. I know you've talked about mental health. For the sake of time, I'm going to ask only one question about mental health, but as someone who lives their life online, you're very online, what kind of boundaries do you have, in this age of social media where we talk about how harmful it can be to your mental health? How do you approach that yourself as you do all this work?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I luckily am someone who is not obsessed with my phone. I could literally, I think that's what the running joke is with all of my friends, like I could leave my phone in a room and like it would be a day later and I'd be like, oh my God, where's my phone? People were like,
that's healthy.
What? But I think that's also just particularly the time that I grew up in. I'm a millennial, we didn't even have social media until we were in college. It's just a different thing. I did certainly not grow up as a child with a cell phone. And so that I think is really different. And I think that the younger generations who are dealing with all of the anxiety and comparison and mental health issues.
Disproportionately girls.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes. I think it's really, really difficult. And I think if we don't start making some serious changes in school, and I mean, Instagram just put out teen accounts, so that way parents have to opt in if your teen is going to be on Instagram. I think that Google, Apple, TikTok should follow suit. I mean, I think that there needs to be more boundaries in place. And I think for me personally, I try to be very specific around the content that I make. And gone are the days, I'm a mom now, gone are the days of me sharing 15 stories in a day, talking to camera. Like, I'm lucky if I can get a post up with some writing on it that is really thought out, because my time is just different now. I do feel like I'm spread a bit thin, and I'm working on my own personal boundaries of where I need to be spending my time. But Instagram is really just a small glimpse into my life, and I try to share the good, the bad, and the ugly, because I think it's really important to, just understand that Instagram is Instagram we know is a glossy place for most people, and it's nice to be real and authentic.
Yeah. Well, this went way too fast, and unfortunately we're out of time. But Hannah, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. You're welcome.
Please stay right here for a quick word from our sponsor, and then I'll be right back for another discussion with two expert doctors.
Introducing our View from the Top moderator and Axios Chief People Officer and General Counsel, Chen Gao.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Chen Gao. I am the Chief People Officer and General Counsel at Axios. I'm really excited to be here. We love our Axios conversations and events, but all of this would not be possible with our sponsor this evening. Please join me in welcoming for our View from the Top segment, our founder and CEO of Sprout Pharmaceuticals, Cindy Eckert. Thanks so much for being here, Cindy.
Thank you for having me.
First off, you're a fierce advocate for women, particularly when it comes to their health. Where does that passion come from?
Ooh, that passion really comes from having lived a double standard in medicine between men and women. So I'm a serial entrepreneur. The first company I built had one of the products for male sexual health. Actually, at that time, when I looked around, there were 26 FDA-approved products for some form of male sexual satisfaction and 0 for women, despite the fact that more women than men struggled from the issue. So dial back many years now, 13 years now, and I'm standing at one of the medical conferences, and they're showing brain scan imagery of women who struggle with this condition. It's called hypoactive sexual desire disorder, or low sex drive. They're showing brain scan imagery of women, how they respond to sexual cues versus women who aren't struggling with it. And it's like lightning struck me. Oh, it's biology. And the standard of care up to that point had been to tell women it was all in their head. So here I was running this successful company in men for which there were a plethora of options. So can you imagine, I dared to sell that off and take this on for women. You would imagine that the path would look similar, right? But the unbelievable difference, the unbelievable double standard in doing that is why I'm so passionate about this in the first place. Media called us female Viagra. So much more interesting. We work on the biggest sex organ right here, the brain, not blood flow. But when you look at those very first headlines, they were female Viagra. Isn't that jewelry?
Oh, wow.
Just sit with that for a second. No, it was spectacular science.
Well, you made history with Addyi, the first FDA-approved treatment option for frustratingly low libido, which is one of women's most common sexual problems. But this was not an easy road, as I've heard. Can you speak a little bit about the challenges that you faced?
Let me give you the Cliff Notes version. So when Viagra was approved in 1998, it was deemed to meet such an important unmet medical need, a national emergency for erections, that it received rare fast-track status and was reviewed and approved by the FDA within 6 months. Addyi, which treats women's most common sexual dysfunction, took 6 years, a very public debate, and by the way, we had 3 times as many patients worth of data in our clinical trials. Now, you tell me whether we value men's sexual pleasure more or women's.
And you've said that a majority of the roadblocks in getting Addyi approved came down to the fact that we as a society value satisfaction for men, but dismiss it for women, sexual satisfaction for men, but we dismiss it for women. I mean, you've been involved in this for over 15 years. Do you think our culture has improved in terms of how we value women's pleasure?
I'll give you a twofold answer. The medical community has not changed at all. We don't see this as a standard of care in women's wellness. Women are not proactively asked this question. But what has changed is that women are no longer tolerating being dismissed. Women want to live full, healthy lives on their own terms, and so I think the days are ending in which we can pat a woman on the shoulder, tell her to have a bubble bath, or just relax. And that has been, make no mistake, that has been a standard of care for a really long time. We have accepted that we can just dismiss it as all in her head. Look, as you mentioned, I've been at this for a very long time. It's almost 10 years ago that we got this product approved. Time magazine put the blue pill on the cover of its magazine when it was approved. Less than 1% of women know that they have an option of a pink pill today. And even this year, an insurance company denied a claim for a woman with Addie, asking if she had failed relationship counseling first. The medical establishment has not changed, but women are sick of it.
So, over the years, you've talked to thousands of women who have been diagnosed with HSDD, the diagnosis that Addie treats. What are some of the ways that treatment has been, receiving proper treatment for this diagnosis has impacted their lives?
I really have had a privilege of talking to so many women who have shared really very personal secrets of things that they've struggled with behind the closed doors of their bedroom. By the way, 43% of women suffer from sexual dysfunction compared to only 31% of men. So more women than men actually struggle with these issues. And the way that almost every woman I've had the privilege of talking to has described it to me is they feel disconnected. They feel disconnected from themselves, and they often feel disconnected from the person that they want to be the most connected to. So to address this is to restore something that is gone for them. It's gone for them biologically. It's neurochemistry, right? We make it so mysterious. Like, we understand scientifically that for millions of women, this can just be a neurochemical issue. I'm struck by stories that I am told. I had an opportunity to speak, and a woman came beelining for me as soon as I got off the stage, and she said, "Can I take a picture with you and show it to my husband?" And I was intrigued immediately at the story. She said, "I was sitting outside of the divorce lawyer's office in my car, and I heard you on a podcast." And she said, "I'd asked 1,000 times in the medical system for help with this. I had never been told that this could be a biological. I had never been told that there were solutions for it." And, for her, look, these issues can snowball, right, in relationships when things like this go wrong. By no means am I saying that her success will be everyone's success, but that is why I continue to fight.
Recently on your social media channels, you've been highlighting the ways in women continue to suffer physically and emotionally due to systemic bias in medicine, and whether that is having to wait for a longer time for treatment for heart attack
Yes.
In the ER, or being told that they're being hysterical or emotional when living with chronic pain, when men, on the other hand, are seen as brave or stoic. What do we have to do as a society in order to get past this?
Oof. I'll tell you, I post about this all the time. Just last week, I posted about the stat that if a woman presents with heart attack symptoms, she waits 11 minutes longer than a man, in really a crisis situation in medicine in which minutes matter. I got thousands of responses, women who talked about showing up, having a stroke, and being sent home, women with acute appendicitis who were told they were having a panic attack. This is a real crisis in medicine. The idea that we believe that women are built only on emotion and not biology. I don't know that it's that we think men are stoic. I think we just think they're credible. So let me give you the Cindy 3Ds of medical disparity, because I do believe it's imperative that we be hyper-vigilant about this. The first D I want you to watch out for is dismissal. That pat on the shoulder, that knee-jerk reaction that is institutionalized in medicine, be it conscious or not conscious, we are programmed to believe you're just freaking out, ladies. And so when that shows up and you're not being taken seriously on the basis of your symptoms medically, you have to push back. By the way, one of the ways dismissal masquerades is when somebody describes something as complicated. Yes, many things in medicine are complicated. That is not an excuse to not solve it. That's one. The second is demonization. And actually, media has a big role in this. Unfortunately, those products for women in which we have the most evidence, we lead with risk. We fearmonger. We focus disproportionately on that because we don't bother spending any time talking about the benefit to the woman or letting her know that it's her option to make that decision based on the risks and benefits. That's infantilizing women. That's deciding for them whether or not they deserve it. And it's a massive disservice to women that we do that. And then the final is the dupe. And this is really unfortunate. Because of number one and number two, because of that dismissal, because of that demonization of those things in which we have evidence in our decision that suffering is okay and acceptable for women, so why bother giving them options for anything? Now we've got the dupe, which is a wasteland of innovation in women's health. If you look at it, women's health is littered with pseudo-medicine, products that have not been either studied to prove their safety or efficacy in women, and that is at best robbing you of your money, and at worst, actually dangerous. Because even those things that you can get over the counter are not benign. And I think that's really what I hate to see in women's health, because so long as we go along with that, so long as we accept and don't hold companies to the standard, the highest standard of science, in which they have to prove safety and efficacy in clinical trials in us, the opportunists will continue to sell snake oil, and no one will go and invest in women's health. And that would be devastating.
Well, this has been fascinating. Thank you so much. We could go on, but we're out of time. So thank you again to being here, and also for being our sponsor, Addy. So stay right here for our next guest of the program. Thanks again, Cindy.
Fun conversation. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Welcoming back to the stage, Caitlin Owens.
So our next two guests are highly qualified experts in women's health in their own right. Please welcome the founder of Sanctum Med and Wellness and the author of her new book, Generation M, Living Well in Perimenopause and Menopause, Dr. Jessica Shepard, and Agenda founder and president, Dr. Jennifer Ashton. Thank you both so much for joining us. I'm really excited for this little panel discussion we have. So just to start us off, I think when I say women's health, so often our minds go to reproductive health. But your work is focused on so much more than that, especially women's health in the second half of life, or as they age. So setting the stage for the rest of our conversation, what do you think are some of the most under-discussed or misunderstood women's health issues?
Oh my God. I was like, we only have 15 minutes. Literally anything, right? Head to toe.
I think it really is that entire duration that we stigmatize or try to place in something of not important. But, you know, Dr. Ashton and I really do spend a lot of time educating in that latter half of our years, because it is something that people really don't want to talk about, I would say.
And I think also, you know, women's health is kind of the layperson term, obviously. If you asked us, you know, backstage, what's your specialty? We would say OBGYN. But women's health has kind of, I mean, I think that was by default, because so many people would say, I mean, if you're not a woman, you literally don't know what an obstetrician gynecologist does.
Right.
And so it's just became easier for us to say, we are doctors for the whole woman, not just a body part. And now we know, and we're learning so much more, and by we, I mean literally the collective we, lay public as well as in medicine and science, that depression in a woman is a different illness than depression in a man. Diabetes in a woman is a different illness than diabetes in a man. So
we're finally
women's
starting
health,
to research women as women and not little men.
look at that.
It's amazing.
Such a novel concept.
Turns out we're a little different.
Right.
And so as you're doing this work, I just, there's so much that women don't even know about their own bodies, right? And so what are some of the most common things you find that women don't know about themselves as they're aging?
I think there's a lot of stigma around women's health in general, even from puberty all the way up till menopause. And I think that sometimes, in my mind, I think it was structured that way on purpose. And I think that has a lot to do with the less that you know, the less choices you can make. And we are finding out with women, like beautiful women in this room today, is that as we start to educate ourselves on what our body does and how it functions and being able to voice ourselves when there are things that don't feel right, is that you can learn more, and the more knowledge that you have, then the better decisions that you can make. So I think that really lends to even us as OBGYNs is really creating more of the conversation for women to feel empowered to bring the questions that they have or the concerns that they have, and giving them the best answers so that they therefore can make the best decisions for themselves.
And just even what you said with puberty, like starting from puberty, your women's health is embarrassing, There's so much shame and stigma, beginning with your menstrual cycles, and I'm sure all the way through to menopause.
Right.
I'm sure that's contributing to
But I also think it's important, this isn't like women are doing horribly and men are doing so great, or women are the victims and men are, it's really not that simple, and that's obviously not accurate. I mean, if you look back in puberty, and any of us how many parents are in the room? Just show of hands. So when our children go through health class, which don't even get us started on that one, is normally
we won't talk about what version we saw.
Right, is normally some poor phys ed teacher who does not want to teach that class, or a science teacher, definitely not a nurse or a physician.
Right.
What do they teach? They teach about your period. Maybe they teach about an erection. And I swear, when my son, who's now 26, man-child, when he was in health class, I picked him up. You're going to have this experience with your kids if you haven't already.
They're getting there.
And I said, so, what did you learn in health today, Alex? Because now I'm thinking, I know I'm going to have to get out a banana in the kitchen and show my son how to use a condom and scar him for life. And he goes, we learned to hold the door open for a girl. And I said, no, seriously, what did you learn? And he said, seriously, that's what we learned. So when you're starting with that,
right,
you can only go up.
That must be true. So let's go a little bit deeper topically, starting with perimenopause. And I'm approaching this as a woman in my 30s, so it's going to be fascinating to hear the answer to this question. But what do women need to know about this stage of life?
You're probably about to have your first hot flash any second.
Yes.
Yes. Turn on the fans.
Menopausal phase, I think that's even actually more confusing than menopause, because we have framed it to this juncture in life where you get, it's kind of like a fork in the road, and people are trying to run away from menopause. Just to let you know, 100% of women will go through menopause.
So
there's no escaping it.
Only the ones who are alive.
Right, yes. And perimenopause really is kind of that ramping up until that fork in the road, if you want to call it, for menopause. And it really can be anywhere from your latter 30s into, the entire 40th decade. But I think that the most important part about menopause is that's really where we should be starting the conversation. So this is why it's important to have the conversations even in your 30s. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to make a decision at that time. But if, again, going to knowledge and how to make informed decision, when you're in your 40s and starting to have some of these changes with your hormones, whether you have a symptom here or there, or things start to feel a little different, that's when you can start the discussion in what could I do? Or these symptoms that I'm having, how do I alleviate them? Or what does this mean for me when I get to menopause? And that should be the framing in how we enter in every phase in our life as being prepared. And so I try to say that perimenopause is kind of like that pre-game time frame. It's more prevention, because you can do things that can actually offset some of your symptoms, but help you enter into that menopausal phase, not being scared, but actually being educated and well-informed.
100%. And I think that when you look at what we know, what we don't know, and again, not just women, right? Most men have a woman in their lives that they care about, whether it's a sister, a partner, a mother, a friend, whatever, right? So this is about educating the entire population. And, you know, Jessica just came out with an incredible book, by the way.
Which happened. The foreword was written by Dr. Jen Ashton. So the duo right here.
That's right. But I left my position as chief medical correspondent at ABC News after 14 years to devote 100% of my time to educating people about women's health issues, of which perimenopause is obviously a big one because it can span so many years. And I will say now, and I put this in my newsletter, I am embarrassed to say this in front of everyone, and especially in front of a colleague. When I tell you guys, I had literally every single symptom of perimenopause for about 5 years and did not recognize them as such. Why? It certainly had nothing to do with education, training, experience. It's the inner conversation that we, as many women, I won't generalize and say everyone, has with ourselves, which is, I'm too busy for this. I can't pay attention to this right now.
Gotta push through it.
Yeah, gotta push through it. It's not that bad. It's just, maybe it's a coincidence, you know, maybe it's just, this is what happens when you're 47 or 50 or 51. And so that says a lot, right? If as an OBGYN, I was not aware, because of whatever reason, denial, busyness, stoicism, who cares, all of it, it could be literally anyone.
Right. Well, so when you're talking about education, the population as a whole, that includes employers. And when we're talking about perimenopause, this coincides often with the prime of women's careers, right?
Yep.
And so how do you feel like that conversation should be going? What do we need to be talking about the workplace and women?
I think the workforce really should be some of the foundational or the fundamental areas in where women can feel safe or comfortable, right? Even if you take it back to breastfeeding, right? Breastfeeding used to be such a taboo and women really didn't know what they were gonna do. Maybe they're in a utility closet trying to, you know, pump. So I think that we've learned, you know, if we can take those instances and really learn from that and how we can actually empower women at some of the best times in their career and helping them feel safe, giving them the resources. You know, even, you know, as Dr. Ashton is building agenda, you know, that can be a resource.
With a Jen,
yes,
like Jennifer.
It's agenda. Very
was
well
not
put.
my idea. I can't take credit for it.
I think it's
But those are the type of communities. And just recently, actually, very new news this week, I became the chief medical officer for HERS, Hims and Hers. I'm the chief medical officer for HERS. Thank you very much. But the purpose of that is really, as we're going forward, building that platform, you know, and HIMSS did really well, but now we're really focusing on HERS and women's health and how to create these conversations, again, in the workforce. This is where women should feel safe because there's a lot of time spent in work, at work, furthering your career.
So, and I think that, and I'm glad there are so many, it's almost literally half the audience is men, which I love to see because, again, this isn't a we versus them situation. Men have to be a very important part of this. You know, and I'll just share quickly, I recently moderated a panel at a CEO roundtable for the American Heart Association, and it was 25 of the top companies in the world.
Wow.
Their CEOs. There were 4 women around the table, including Nancy Brown, who's the CEO of the American Heart Association. And it was about obesity and managing obesity with weight loss medications. And as we were leaving, I said to her, you know, next year we should do menopause. And you know what she said? Jen, I'm afraid no one would come. And she is the most dynamic, the most powerful, the most impactful CEO, sitting around tables with CEOs that literally have transformed their companies, some of which have 300,000 employees. And for her to say, if we talk about menopause, I'm afraid no one would come. We have a lot of work to do.
A lot of work to do.
That is very powerful. And you brought up weight loss. Can we talk a little bit about medical interventions?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's these GLP-1s are obviously coming on the market, but what do you think women should know? There are treatment options as they go through menopause, perimenopause. What do you think women should know? What are the most important tools they have?
I think
we
when
love
you,
talking
yeah,
about
we
this
love to, and whether it's weight loss medications or hormones or other medications for menopause or anything, I think the problem, and I know Jess and I are on the same page with this, is that we have a society that's literally black or white when it comes to medicine and health. It's either this or this. It's either treat it or don't treat it. It's either do it naturally or take a prescription. That's not the way, in my opinion, in Jessica's opinion, medicine in 2024 should be practiced in this country or anywhere. I think that the best way is a truly holistic way, not in like I'm going to swing a crystal over your head holistic way.
It doesn't work.
But,
so just so
yeah,
you know.
I mean, you could do that, but in a way that you incorporate lifestyle behavior. If I need to write a prescription, I'm writing a prescription. You connect the dots between the mental health and the physical, and that's what I think people should know, whether it's managing weight or managing menopause.
And in addition to that, I think that women, we really, especially in the perimenopausal phase into menopause, this is a biological thing that is going to occur. And I think that there are things that we can offset with, whether it's lifestyle or medication, but really just the point of accepting what your body will do and how you're going to work into that and how you're going to feel empowered by these changes. I think the more that we change the narrative in being like, this is a beautiful chapter in my life and these are the things that are going to happen to my body. Yes, I can do some things medically with GLPs if I choose to or not, hormone replacement therapy, and also lifestyle. I think that it does not mean that we are going to have those 20-year-old bodies anymore. And that needs to be a place of acceptance as well. But as you're coming into that chapter, is like, I'm going to embrace these changes and use some things that are going to help me, but not trying to look at it as a bad thing because this is what my body is doing and I'm going to fight it. I think that's important as well.
Any more than we didn't want teenagers to do that when they were going through puberty. We didn't want to do that. And we don't ask women before they have a baby to be like, oh, well, it's either or. Right. This is a stage. This is going to be an adventure. Like we used to say to all our pregnant patients, guess what? This is going to be your experience, your adventure. Yeah. And when you come out of it, it's not a matter of being the same, being better, being worse. It's going to be different, and that's called life.
Yeah.
I love that. As much as I want to keep going, we are out of time, and I'll get in trouble if I ask you another question. Doctors, thank you so much for being here. This was so fun. Thank you. Thank you. And y'all, please stay seated. We have one more guest. Oh, and we'll be doing a picture.
Welcoming back to the stage, Maya Goldman.
Hello. Great conversation so far. We have one more left. And I'm really excited to welcome our final guest this evening, a leading force for women's health policy change in New York State Assembly member Linda B. Rosenthal. Thank you so much for being here, Assembly Member.
Oh, thanks for having me.
We've heard a lot tonight from providers, from people in the private sector. You come at things from a slightly different point of view. What do you see as the role of the policymaker and the state policymaker in women's health?
Well, because of today's environment, it's even more important than it ever was. But when I was elected in 2006, there were only 36 women out of a 150 member body. Now there are 53, which is better, but not the desired number. But, you know, before I and other women were elected, there was no one who concentrated on women's health, women's issues in general, because they were men and they have a different experience and different concerns. So I think states right now have massive obligation to protect women's health and women's rights.
Yeah. How has the conversation in the state legislature changed in the almost 20 years since you've been in office?
Well, when a colleague of mine was elected in 1980, there were no women's bathrooms.
Wow.
So she had to find her place to go. There are things we now discuss, and some of it is legislation that I've passed that was never touched before. For example, axing the tampon tax. Mm-hmm. So no one had thought of that. No one cared until you look at it from a woman's perspective. And so that's one of the many menstrual equity laws I passed. But we have different experiences, and so we prioritize things that men may not and do not.
Yeah, and was it hard to get your male colleagues to listen on these issues?
Well, I think a lot of them were just very embarrassed. It was about 2016. And initially, when I introduced the bill, I was told, well, we need that tax revenue for the general fund. I'm like, okay, it's the end of session. We're going to do this next session. I mean, why should women shoulder that burden? And so I did pass it, but I didn't have that many conversations with my male colleagues because they were shying away from it. I did mention blood and other things on the assembly floor, and their faces were, that was fun.
Yeah.
But now I think men see it as an advantage to look like they're supporting women's health. But the ideas don't come from them, even though they try. Mm-hmm. But, you know, it looks good on their campaign lit. I supported that.
Yeah.
And I really don't like that.
Yeah.
Because you really did nothing about it. But everyone can take their track. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you want to see from your male colleagues?
Well, they shouldn't be embarrassed. They also should realize that we know what we're talking about, and we propose bills. It is because it comes from a place of experience. It comes from a place of working with other women, working with advocacy groups that are concerned about women's issues and women's health. And don't try to grandstand.
Yeah. It's good advice for all of us in general. Getting a little more specific, New Yorkers are going to vote starting next week on an equal rights amendment that protects against unequal treatment based on reproductive health and autonomy, among other things. How is this different from what's already in place in New York, and why is its important relevant to the future? Mm-hmm.
Well, it's Prop 1, which is on the other side of your ballot, and it enshrines in the New York State Constitution these equal protections. So while in New York State we have fabulous laws protecting choice, abortion, reproductive health care, the whole gamut are in law. But if the worst thing happens, it's not in our Constitution and laws can be overruled. So it's key that we maintain those protections in New York State. And the other side is trying to say, oh, it's about trans women playing sports, and it's really not about that. But, you know, people who don't care about women's issues will say anything.
Yeah, how have you seen the conversation change around abortion in New York State since the overturn of Roe v. Wade?
Well, New York State passed abortion rights 3 years before Roe v. Wade, so we've always been a proud champion of abortion and reproductive health care. We did put it way back then in the penal law. So some years ago in 2019, we changed it and added some protections, but took it out of the penal law, put it in the health law because that's where it should be. When Dobbs came down, you know, it was a grim day, but I and others put in legislation to address immediately some of the effects. So I passed 2 laws, one that protects medical providers from losing their license if they help women from out of state, and also protect their medical malpractice so that they can't be sued here in New York State for actions they take to help women from other states. We also did geofencing, which is what anti-choice groups would target women walking into clinics or hospitals with like a digital boundary into which they would send messages like, don't do it, adoption, etc. So we banned that. And also that warrants cannot be, they can be served, but they don't have to be obeyed when it comes to women's health data.
Yeah. Yeah, and so we have Prop 1 that's on the ballot. Is there anything else that you think New York State, that you'd like to see New York State do to protect women's reproductive rights?
Well, we do have good laws regarding IVF. I think we need, well, I've worked on and others on sexual assault, which is every day there's another horrible story that you hear. So that's very important. I have a bill called the TAMP Act, which is total access to menstrual products, so that everywhere you go, a museum, department store, there will be products, because it's a normal biological function. However, it's still considered shameful by some in society, and so we have to normalize that. I have a bill called the New York Privacy Act. So if you download an app to keep track of your period, that is not protected by HIPAA, which means that the company has access to it. Another state government could have access to it and see that you skipped your period for 2 months. When you come back to that state, like, wait, what happened? And the invasion of privacy depicted in a candidate's project, 2025, wants to keep track of abortions, reproductive health care. So we have to pass this bill into law that protects your personal health data. So it can't be sold, it can't be used for ads, can't be used for anything unless you agree with it. Mm-hmm. And I think we're going to pass more laws along that line as well.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Fortunately, we only have time for one more question, but I wanted to ask, you represent a district in New York City, but New York is a really interesting state in that it's very urban in parts, very rural in parts, and women in different parts of the state have different health needs. There are maternity care deserts in some places, rural areas. How do you balance that in your policymaking?
Well, you have to talk to everyone. So just because someone represents Buffalo, that's different from New York City, we all work together to address everyone's concerns. So sometimes there's no childcare available in rural parts of the state, so we take that into account. Just have a circle of women who are elected talking about their individual needs and the needs of their constituents. So it's a very inclusive process, and it's very empowering to see that we can get things done when we work together and when there are enough women represented in the legislature.
That is a great note to end on. Thank you so much, Assembly Member, for being here tonight.
Thank you. Hey, that went fast.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. This was so great. We're so glad that you were all able to join us tonight. Please stick around. We've got drinks, mingle, meet some new people, and sign up for our newsletters. Thank you so much. I know, that was so fast.